everyone, so today I'm doing a review of Bon Iver's new self-titled album. It comes out on the 20th of June worldwide, or it's available on iTunes on the 17th of June. Now if you don't know who Bon Iver is, I'm going to briefly cover him and his first album, but otherwise if you already know him, just click this link at the bottom and we'll skip to the full track-by-track review. Alright, here we go. Quick information about the band Bon Iver. So Bon Iver is really, it's Justin Vernon. It's all of his songwriting abilities. In 2007, he released an album independently. Now, this album was called For Emma, Forever Ago. Okay, this was their first album, and Justin Vernon he retreated into his father's cabin up in the woods just to get away from a band disbanding and a relationship falling apart. And then he just went up there to recover and to get his head straight. And then this album started coming out. He recorded the whole thing by himself, just using a few different microphones and some old recording equipment that was around, and his Silvertone guitar. The first album has this big folk acoustic feel, and just my favourite thing about it is just all the different vocal layerings that he's done through all the songs, and it's just really interesting to listen to. Like, you can feel a lot of pushing and pulling over the different vocal lines and different vocal melodies, and the best thing about it is it's quite ugly in parts. Like, the vocal melodies don't sit quite right, and there's pushing and pulling, and there's a phrase might end and then slightly a little bit later the same phrase will end in the background by a different recorded voice, and it's all done by the one guy, Justin Vernon, but it gives it a much more organic a feel, and it almost feels as if there's a choir singing the same song, and it gives definitely an interesting vocal approach. So I definitely checked that album out, and it went really well. It was highly regarded worldwide. But now we'll get on to talking about Bon Iver's second self-titled album, Bon Iver. Right. So with Bon Iver's second album, it's a big departure from the sound of the first album. There's a lot more money and a lot more time spent just producing the album as a whole. As soon as the opening track begins, you instantly know that it's going to be a different album than the first. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's gone in a slightly different direction. Still, his songwriting remains the same. It's just broadened so much, and it's like someone saying, oh great, that's, I invented the wheel today, and then someone just driving up and say, yep, here's the keys to a Ferrari. Like, there's that much of a difference. Like, there's such a big difference in terms of studio production and quality on all the acoustic guitar sounds and everything like that. Like, it really is a proper big budget album, and I think that's great. All these songwriting ideas and different vocal styles, they're still definitely there. They're just in more of a much more a polished atmosphere. So all the the unevenness of the vocal melodies in the first album that I like so much, they're still definitely there in the second album, but they're quantized and polished a little bit more, so it's not as noticeable as that they're going to be, a little bit in and out of time. So you still get that big choir effect, but it's just slightly different this time around. This time around there's many more instruments recorded. There's a lot of slide guitar and organs and synth, and violins and different string sections and different guitars, different drums coming in, different vocal harmonies. Quite different from the first album. It still has that same heartfelt longing in Justin Vernon's voice, and it still has the same songwriting that he did from the first album, and so it still ties quite together. It's just a big leap forward from the first album, and yeah, I really like it. So we're going to go through track by track right now. So the opening track, the first track, titled Perth, the all-important opening track, it really sets up the whole tone and feel of the album, and it features a really catchy, almost haunting guitar riff, and as soon as the drums start and then the synth come in, you know that this album's going to be a big departure from the first. And my favourite part is the haunting guitar riff when it coincides with the different vocal melodies. And if you don't know what I mean, I'll play it for you right now. Here we go. I raised the lake, stood alive for you. The second track titled Minnesota features a lot of different delayed, layered electric guitars. And the interesting thing about this is there's a lot of different banjos and slide guitars and a few different various wind instruments going on as well. It features a really big and driving sort of verse, but then everything sort of changes and gets stripped back for the chorus. My favourite part of the song is exactly that, is the sort of change from going from the big verse back to a really stripped back sort of acoustic feel chorus. I'll play that for you now.
Fall is coming soon, looking for the moon and upon you. Never gonna break, never gonna break, never gonna break, never gonna break all that it seems.
Third track starts out with some ultra clean acoustic playing. Now it's many layers of this acoustic, and it's completely different in the sound to the first album. This is one of the cleanest acoustic sounds I've ever heard once they're all sort of layered together. Later on in the song, sort of the band and different strings and sort of other atmospheric pads come in. My favourite part of this song is towards the end. You can still hear the sort of chiminess of this acoustic guitar, but suddenly the whole sort of soundscape is just filled by all the other strings and sort of atmospheric pads going on. It's a really beautiful track. This is one of my favourites.
I was not magnificent.
The track is titled Towers, and now the really interesting thing about this song is you start off and you sort of think, oh yeah, I've got the whole song figured out. It's a nice sort of sing-along, more of sort of acoustic vibe, but suddenly at about halfway the whole song completely changes and all these sort of different slide guitars come in, and it almost sort of feels like almost like a western sort of a country song. It completely changes, but it doesn't stray too far from the original idea of the song, and so it all feels very natural. It just doesn't feel like they changed genres, just because they could. But my favourite part is just sort of the beginning. It's a really catchy sort of acoustic sing-along sort of a vibe, and you can really see how maybe Justin Vernon approached this track with just this sing-along acoustic song, and then suddenly with the huge budget and everything, they were really just able to take it so much further. And so that's sort of my favourite part, just at the beginning. I'll play that The next track is one of my very favourites off the album. It starts off and sort of instantly, once it kicks in, you think, wow, this is going to be a great sort of a sing-along track, and it's very catchy. But the interesting thing is every now and again there's just these little sounds that just appear, and sometimes some of the sounds only appear like once or twice throughout the entire song, but they make it so much more interesting to listen to that it's not just a repetitive verse chorus sort of a vibe. There's many more ideas. Not sort of a repetitive verse chorus sort of a vibe. There's much more thought and planning going into recording this, and a good example of that is just in the beginning. Like, it's just sort of starts and the ball just sort of starts rolling, and then suddenly there's this big bell chime, and you think, wow, where did that come from? And then it changes the pace slightly again. So this is one of my favourite songs. It's definitely worth a listen to.
Frost took up the ice, pressed against the pain, could see the veins, and there was pause now.
So the sixth track is pretty interesting. Really, the biggest thing about this song is sort of the chorus and the different vocal melodies that are going on. But otherwise, it's just a pretty quirky instrumental. There's just many layers, and it's sort of it's nice just having a bit of a break from the nice sort of sing-along that we had the previous track to just sort of a nice sort of flowing instrumental. And yeah, my favourite part again is just sort of the vocal melodies, so we'll go through that. So the seventh track, titled Wash, sort of starts out with this nice sort of flowing piano melody, but really the standout feature to me of this track is just towards the end when you've got all the different sort of string sections and different orchestrations coming in, and it really paints sort of the soundscape, and it really just sort of enhances the sort of feel, you know, from his voice and his lyrics. My favourite part is actually towards the very beginning when the strings first enter and they come in and then they quickly fade out, and it's really sort of surprising, and it makes the whole sort of track a little bit more interesting to listen to, just having little things sort of pulling in and out. Here we go.
Bed is hardly shown. Screams across the phone.
The 8th track is really a standout from the album. It's actually the first single off the album, and to me it sort of encompasses everything, all the songwriting sort of ability Justin Vernon had on the first album, but it's just, you know, in such a larger sense now with this album. It starts out and it's got, you know, a lot of sort of reverb and sort of vocal effects. Almost you could sort of, you know, enlighten to something like a for Phil Collins album or whatever. Like give it a listen, you'll definitely sort of hear that in the tone. But then it sort of broods, and then there's, you know, the band comes in, and again there's all the different synth and digital sort of orchestrations and pads, but then it gets stripped away again to just, you know, hearing sort of the one-man, sort of one acoustic feel like was on the first album. It's definitely one of the standout tracks. Now the 9th track is the shortest of the album. It's only a minute and a half sort of long. Really the whole thing about this track is I think it's just meant to be sort of a break from all the other ideas placed before it, and then it's just meant to be sort of an introduction into the last track, track 10. Now so track 9, it basically just has a lot of different reversed sort of electric guitar sounds, a lot of maybe some different organs, some computer sort of beeps and some synths and everything like that. It's quite interesting to listen to, and it's very short, it only goes for a minute and a half. I'll play my favourite part from that now. Track titled Beth. Really, this is probably my favourite track off the album. It features a lot of different sort of vocal effects on Justin's voice, and there's a lot of different sort of overdriven guitars, and a lot like before, like the different sort of synth and sort of pad sounds and strings and everything like that. But the really interesting thing about this is how the electric sort of piano jumps in and around the vocal melody about halfway through. The other interesting thing to notice about this track is a really sort of a tasteful guitar solo about sort of 3/4 through the song. But really my favourite part is about halfway through, again, where this sort of electric piano sort of sounds jump in and around the vocal sort of melody. So I'll play that for you now.
Said your love is low, standing up on it, won't be back. I ain't living in the dark no more. It's not a promise, I'm just gonna call it.
So that's all the different tracks off the album, and really I like this album quite a lot. There really is something special and unique about Justin sort of Vernon's approach to songwriting, and the different sort of way that he overdubs his vocals over every track. And so it almost seems like, you know, again I said before, like there's this big sort of a choir in every song, and it gives it such a unique sort of atmospheric vibe that I really haven't heard a lot before. Although the album's a huge departure from the first album, still the songwriting is there. It's just this time they just had so much more of a bigger budget and just much more time and thought, and you know, everything went into this album. And yeah, I think it's great. I think it really deserves a listen to, simply because it's so different and unique. And there's not a lot of sort of albums that are coming out at the moment that have this particular unique sound. The sort of the standout feature, you know, on pretty much all the tracks except the instrumental, of course, is really Justin Vernon's voice. There's so much emotion and, you know, heartache and sort of longing in every sort of phrase that he sings. It really just makes it more interesting and more compelling to listen to. So I definitely, if you're a fan of sort of folk, indie rock, and, you know, atmospheric side of things as well, I definitely have a listen. There's a lot of sort of different nods into production styles that other sort of big bands have used, you know, recently. But just give the whole album a listen, and I definitely think you'll like it. Alright, see you later.